This is Garis book readings of my two published paper books written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. This is chapter 11, entitled Post Globa, from my second book entitled Multis and Monos, What the Multicultured Can Teach the Monocultured Towards the Creation of a Global State. Chapter 11, Post Globa. I'll now read out the subtopic headings. A. Introduction. B. The size of political units revisited. C. Planetary independence wars. D. Solification, that is, creating the solar state. E. Stellar and the Artalects. A. Introduction. This chapter speculates on what might follow the creation of a global state, not so much in the sense of what a global state would set out to do, as was described in chapter 9, but longer term, that is, a century or more after its creation. It begins with the longer term historical trend of the size of political units, extrapolating several centuries into the future. The following two sections then ask the basic question as to whether a global state could break up as it becomes interplanetary, and if not, what kind of state could be built across the solar system. The final section speculates on how a solar state system might cope with the rise of the Artalects, that is, godlike, massively intelligent machines, whose rise will pose the greatest threat to the continued existence of the human species in the latter half of the 21st century. B. The size of political units revisited. Earlier in this book, Chapter 1, Section F, we argued that the creation of a global state seems inevitable, given the long historical trend of the growth of the size of political units. Human groups started off as small bands of hunter-gatherers, then tribes. Then with the rise of the agricultural revolution came towns, then cities, then countries, now unions, and all this at an accelerating exponential rate. If we extrapolate this trend by plotting the size of political units on the vertical axis of a graph, and with time in years on the horizontal axis, we can predict that the size of political units should equal the size of the planet's population later this century. Hence, assuming that whatever forces that are creating larger and larger political units remain in force, we can then expect a global state to be formed well before this century has finished. But if we continue to extrapolate the graph, what can we predict? Again, assuming the same rate of exponential growth of the size of political units. Common sense says that if we're talking about sizes larger than the Earth, then the only possible sites for political expansion are the Moon, the asteroids, other planets and moons, and perhaps large space stations containing huge numbers of people. I do not include stars in this list because in the next century or two, it's virtually certain that we will not see a human colony on a planet of another star. The nearest other star is trillions of kilometers away. So let us concentrate on the likelihood of interplanetary colonies being established and ask ourselves the question whether it might be possible that the global state may see its interplanetary colonies declare independence. C. Planetary independence wars. The above question may not sound as strange as it seems. It can take many hours to send a radio signal from one planet to another, thus making a normal conversation with its quick repartee impossible. Hence, on purely physics-based grounds alone, the potential exists that once interplanetary colonies exist, they will feel and will actually become, to some extent, cut off from their Mother Earth. As these colonies grow in population size and attain self-sufficiency, it's possible to imagine that they will begin to develop a sense of independence from the mother culture on Earth. Circumstances on the interplanetary colonies will be quite different from those on Earth. For a start, the environment anywhere off the Earth will be deadly without advanced technology. Probably only a certain range of personality types will choose to become off-world colonists. So in time, the colonists and Earth's citizens will diverge in their basic personality distributions. With the psychological barrier created due to the finite speed of light, 300 million meters per second, between the terrestrials and the colonists, and their lack of spontaneous conversation, it seems quite possible that the two groups may develop along different paths that may eventually come into conflict due to a clash of interests. If the clash of interests, attitudes and values is great enough, the colonists might even declare independence and cut themselves off from the earth, in which case the political unification of all human beings will come to an end. We would see the equivalent of what the American colonies, North, Central and South, did to the European mother cultures in the 18th and 19th centuries. D. Solification. That's creating the solar state. But let us assume that the above arguments do not turn out to be valid, and that the global culture, Globa, treats the colonists very well, so that relations between Globa and the colonies remain strong and good. In that case, we can imagine the creation of solar, S-O-L-A, that is a solar state, S-O-L-A-R state, solar state, a unified political state that is spread across the solar system, with people living on the Earth and probably the Moon, Mars, the asteroids, many other moons, and probably various space stations. We could label the creation of this political unity spread over the solar system solification, analogous to the word globification or multification. But how realistic is solification? After all, this book has made a strong case that the preconditions needed for the creation of a global state is a global media, a global language, and global cultural homogenization. But with a finite light speed barrier, this argument can be used in reverse. The initial colonists will be all Globan citizens, speaking the same global language. Then they will spread out across the solar system, and hence create the conditions that could undermine the existence of a global language. The colonies would be cut off to some extent from the home world, and may develop their own dialects. Psychological folkways may diverge, so that differences in attitudes and values may harden between mother world and colonies. Perhaps this phenomenon could be very well studied by the home world and not be allowed to fester. Perhaps the home world could offer regular trips back to the Earth to the colonists so as to maintain a cultural homogenization, to avoid solar, S-O-L-A, being undermined. In time, the enormous advantages of living peacefully and affluently in Globa may become so ingrained that the disadvantages of cultural differentiation, that is, the possibility of warfare and an arms trade, may become unthinkable even to the colonists, in the way that almost all people over the earth have outlawed slavery. E. Stella and the Artlects. This section makes a qualitative leap by discussing whether a stella, S-T-E-L-L-A, that is, a politically unified organization of human beings spread out over the stars, could be created. Personally, I'm skeptical, because as I argued in my first book, The Artlect War, Cosmos versus Terrans, a bitter controversy concerning whether humanity should build godlike, massively intelligent machines. Humanity will see the rise of the Artlect, that is, godlike, massively intelligent machines this century, with artificial intelligence levels potentially trillions of times above the human levels. If the centuries of human progress needed to reach the stars, it's almost certain that humanity will have had to face up to the prospect of the creation of the Artlects, and may, as my first book suggests, have torn itself apart with a global civil war. Until this century, wars have usually been linked to geography. That is, one political group who lives in Area A goes to war with another political group who lives in Area B. But what of the possibility of a global civil war, where an issue is so divisive that it splits the whole planet in a manner that is not geographically linked? For example, an issue that divides families, towns, cities across the planet. Such an issue would probably correlate with personality types. I claim that the species dominance question is such an issue. From experience with the talks I give to audiences on this issue, I know that the question whether humanity should build Artlects or not divides humanity down the middle, 50-50, 40-60, 60-40. The formation of a global state and the technological possibility of creating Artlects will probably be occurring at about the same time, that is, from middle to late this century. If an Artlect war occurs, as I predict it will in my earlier book, then any previously formed global state will be destroyed due to the extreme lack of cultural homogenization. If Globa is destroyed, then any hope of creating a solar or a stellar will also be destroyed. Cosmism, the ideology in favour of building artefacts this century, and its opponent ideology of Terranism, are extremely powerful and bitterly opposed ideologies that I believe have the potential to kill off the creation of Globa. Of course, I hope this does not happen, but we have never had ideology so powerful before. The cosmos-Terran dichotomy may tear humanity apart, brother from brother, parents from children, town from town. It will be a global civil war that may easily prove strong enough to destroy the dreams of the globus, to create a global state, a solar state, and even a stellar state. Blank, blank, blank. Oh, I'm just slow, sorry. So I guess that's the end of chapter, is it 11? Chapter 11, I think. I've got it so magnified, it's very, that was the end of chapter 11. So next chapter, chapter 12, is called simply Brief Summary, so I'll stop here. Ciao.